Hey guys, today we're talking about wild horses, and because that is such a huge topic that ranges from, Mustangs to Sable Island ponies to zebras, I thought I'd narrow it down to more of a local context, and we are going to talk about the wild horses of Alberta. Did you know Alberta had wild horses? We do. The fun thing about these is that they were not always wild. The wild horses of Alberta are actually descended from domestic horses. Yeah, that's right. According to the Government of Alberta website, the page called Feral Horses in Alberta, I'm going to be using the words feral and wild interchangeably. This is what it says. Feral horses are found along the eastern slopes of Alberta from north of the Sheep River up to the Brazeau River area. Currently, the highest feral horse populations are found west of the town of Sundre. The majority of these are believed to be descendants of domestic horses used in logging and guiding and outfitting operations in the early 1900s. When these horses were no longer needed, they were abandoned or released. Over the years, escaped and illegally released horses have been added to the population, creating the bands present today. End quote. Now you know that we have wild horses in Alberta. I would like to ask, did you know that they are also quite controversial? Oh yeah, crazy controversial. Okay, maybe not crazy, but the controversy has been featured in shows like Heartland, which is a Canadian Broadcasting Corporation very popular show about horses and ranching in Alberta. Anyways, let's talk about why people like the horses first, and then we're going to talk about why they don't like them. Proponents of the wild horses argue that these horses are an important part of Canada's cultural heritage, particularly in Western Canada. These horses have a strong role in settling the West. For example, of course, as I mentioned earlier, they were used in logging and guiding and outfitting. They were used to help plow the fields before tractors were a thing. They provided a means of transportation, and of course, um, we can't forget that horses played a vital role in many First Nations cultures as well. Um, there was one source somewhere I read that many Indigenous peoples believe that these are actually just wild horses that have always been here. Um, I suppose that's debatable, although most of what I have read, the people do believe that these particular herds in Alberta over by Sundre are from formerly domesticated horses. Yeah, so they are a huge part of our culture, and of course now they're still a huge part of our culture through tourism and the the cowboy trail is still a system of or one road through Alberta with a lot of cultural heritage sites, and it goes very close to where these horses live. Very big tourism and culturally important area. As to why some people don't like the wild horses, the main argument stems from the fact that these are an introduced species. Now, as I just mentioned, that is a bit of a debatable claim, but generally they are considered to be an introduced species, and if you've watched my wild boar video, you've seen how economically and ecologically destructive an introduced species can be. Now, these horses are far from being as bad as wild boar. they certainly are not tearing up crops and digging up ecosystems. They're not doing that. However, the ecosystem where they do live, in the foothills along the eastern slopes of the Rocky Mountains, is a fairly delicate grassland ecosystem, and it needs to be managed properly in order for the plants and the rest of the ecosystem to survive and to thrive. The problem with horses is that they don't tend to move around as much as other large grazers do, like bison or cattle. Bison or cattle will come to a spot, eat all the grass, and move on and not come back for a while, unless, of course, they're confined and, have to come back. But that gives the plants time to grow back up, the grasses can grow back up, and it stays a healthy ecosystem. Horses don't tend to move around like that, and so there can be overgrazing, which is quite destructive to the plants and the soil, and of course all of the other organisms that depend on the plants and soil. So the government of Alberta is working on managing the population of the wild horses. They don't want to, at this point, it doesn't seem to be so bad that they need to be eradicated completely, but they do want to control them. In the past, they have done culls where they trap a bunch of horses and either have them adopted out or send them to the slaughter plant. There are different options, of course. Recently, they also tried a program where they... Now, this one's a bit more difficult to understand. They partnered with the Wild Horses of Alberta Society, which does a lot of things like rehabilitating wild horses that have had to be caught for whatever reason. I think they care for sick and injured ones, things like that. But the Alberta government partnered with the Wild Horses of Alberta Society, and this, as far as I understand, this project is now done. It was, I think, a 5-year project or something, and they somehow, it's called immunocontraception in mares, and they somehow could vaccinate the mares, and the drug that was used would be some sort of contraceptive, so then the animals wouldn't breed as quickly, or there wouldn't be as many offspring, and so the herd wouldn't grow as quickly. Apparently it's a fairly safe thing. Yes, okay, I don't know enough science to understand this, but apparently it's something that is possible and temporary. And so they were going to see if that could work rather than having to cull animals, just not have the population growth in the first place. And of course the horses are controlled by, difficult winters, bears, wolves, that sort of thing as well, but it wasn't quite enough, and the herds were growing too big, and as I said, they were damaging the ecosystem, and also the area where they live is crown land, which is also used by cattlemen. They graze their cattle there, and so they wanted enough grass for their cattle, and so the government said, well, both the wild horses and the cattle are important, so we have to make sure that there's room for both to thrive. So that's a bit of an overview of the somewhat controversial, but also pretty cool wild horses of Alberta. If you want to see them, they are in a few different spots, although I think the biggest herd is out west of the small town of Sundre, down in I call it southern Alberta. I think it's technically still central Alberta. Yeah, but yes, you go to Sundre, go west of town. There's Crown Land where the wild horses live, and then there's a ranch, Yaha Tinda Ranch, where there are horses belonging to the wildlife officers. They spend their winters out at the ranch, and then the wild horses are also around that ranch as well. So you can get some pretty good pictures if you get lucky enough to see the herd. And it's a pretty beautiful area anyways. So I do encourage you, if you're in the area, go check out the wild horses.